Hey guys, and welcome to the second part of our lectures on the age of imperialism. Now, last time in our lecture, we actually talked about Africa, and we talked about, remember, this magnificent African cake and the scramble for Africa, and how all these European nations, well, at least 14 of them anyway, carved up Africa like a cake into different pieces so that they could all have a piece of the pie or the cake for themselves. And most of it was to get Africa's natural resources. And it was also because land equals power. All right. So the more land a nation held, the more power that they had. And it was very strategic to get land in some areas for not only the resources, but also the ability to put things in there, such as, military bases and that sort of thing. So today we're going to be talking about Asia and imperialism in Asia. So we looked at Africa and you guys saw how the Europeans were there. Well, imperialism isn't just about Africa, it's also about where else these European nations went. So this starts with us talking about the Dutch East India Company. Now, one of the things that you guys can see here, there's a map, and always when you see a map, you should look at what the title is. So the title of this map is Colonies in Southeast Asia in 1895. So we know that this area down here, it's below China, okay? And all of this area down here is Southeast Asia, all right? Over here, to give you guys an idea, would actually be Australia. Up here, okay, you're going to see Japan up here, all right? But in 1895, this is how all of Southeast Asia, which sits below China, was separated. In the key over here, that's the next thing that you should look at when you're looking at a map. You can see it color-coded as to which countries held property in Southeast Asia. So you guys can see down here, it says the Dutch East Indies, because the Dutch held a lot of land. Now you might be saying, who in the world are the Dutch? Well, the Dutch actually would hail from what we know today as the Netherlands. And that is up in the northern part of Europe. Okay, so that would be the Netherlands was where they were from. So what is this Dutch East India Company that I'm talking about here? Well, this Dutch East India Company was actually created in 1602. And it is actually the reason why it's so important, not only just holding land, but it was important because of the fact that it was the first real incorporated corporation, okay, that we have that was actually trading and doing things in the history of the world. And they started in 1602. So what they did is that they were really into trying to break into the spice market. Portugal had held a control over the spice market for a really long time. But then, as you guys know, in the 1600s, Portugal and Spain are both, trying to have control over the New World, all right, in the Americas, in South and North America. And so it leads to a lot of conflicts between them, and they start to lose their handle on the spice market. Now, to give you an idea where spices come from, you're talking about places like India, Southeast Asia, China, okay, silk primarily from China. But the Dutch East India Company, they established a trading post in 1603 in a place called Indonesia, okay? So it is now modern day today. It would still be known as Indonesia, but another part of it would be known as Jakarta. And it was actually this area here, Batavia, okay, where they set up a trading post in 1603. And that was the first permanent trading post that they had there. So they fought further. Just from this little trading post here, okay, in Batavia, they continue to go out and they capture different pieces. You guys can see here, all of this in here in pink, All of this, okay, belongs to the Dutch East India Company. Now, that is extremely important because by 1659, they actually dominated not only parts of Southeast Asia, but they also dominated the entire Sri Lankan coast, okay, which is also in Asia. And by 1669, they were in places like Persia, Bengal, the Malaccas, which you can see right there, Taiwan, Siam, and Malabar. All of these places are in Asia. And they were also the richest company in the world, and they held all of this land. So this is a huge, huge thing. Okay. So you guys should know the main thing there, even though there's a lot of information, but the Dutch East India Company, they controlled trade in Southeast Asia. So this leads us into then China. Now, basically what you should know about China is that from the 1600s, China had basically isolated itself from the rest of the world. They wanted nothing to do with the rest of the world, and they totally refused to adopt any sort of Western ways. They permitted trade with European powers, but only at this one port, the port of Canton, basically where Europeans could trade with them, but they were basically at the whim of the Emperor of China. Okay, meaning that if the Emperor didn't want to trade with whatever European ship came in, he didn't have to. Well, what starts to happen is that the British are the first people who are like, we don't like this. And they were actually involved in the opium trade. And they were trying to bring opium into China and try to trade it there for other goods like silk and spices and things like that. Well, China gets very annoyed with them because they are going to try and halt the British from bringing in opium anymore. It results in a war. And China's going to fight the Opium Wars against England in the mid-1800s over this British opium trade. What ends up happening, however, is that the British are actually going to win. So they are going to win this, and in the process, it actually weakened the Qing dynasty, and it's going to force China to trade with the world. Originally, this was stopped. The Opium Wars were stopped by what was known as the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. But what it did is that it opened up trade for Europe, at least 5 different ports, namely the British. Okay, so it opens up trade for the rest of the world with China, and it is also going to give the British Hong Kong. However, in 1858, China was forced again to give up more of their ports. They gave up about 11 more, and they had to grant special privileges, such as the right to trade with the interior of China, which means not just on the coastline, which becomes a big deal. So one of the things that you guys should know is that between 1870 and 1914 is when World War I starts, is that the Western nations, European nations, are actually going to carve China into that term that we had, all right, into that sphere of influence. So that was one of our vocab terms. And a sphere of influence, basically what that is areas in which outside powers claim exclusive trading rights. And this is exactly what is going to happen in China, all right, because they're forced to open up with the rest of the world, and Western powers are going to try and come to China and set up sphere of influences. They're not trying to set up colonies. They're not trying to set up a protectorate, but what they are doing is they have a sphere of influence, meaning that they held exclusive trading rights. Okay, exclusive meaning like special rights to trade in certain areas of China. All right, so this was a huge blow to the Chinese emperor and also to China itself, because it had tried to remain separate from the rest of the world for so long. So furthermore, we have here imperialism in Asia being expanded into Japan. Now, the first thing that you should know is that Japan was actually ruled for many, many, many years by shoguns, and they wished to keep foreign influences out of their country. They wanted to pretty much remain isolationists. They didn't want people coming in and taking over anything in their country. But what ends up happening is that in 1853, the United States, under basically the lead of Commodore Matthew Perry. He was an American naval officer. He's going to lead an expedition to Japan, and he's going to convince the shogun, which is basically a medieval type ruler, to open port for trades to the United States. So he is going to convince them. He's going to say, you need to open up these ports. Now, what's going to happen here is that Japan gets nervous, unlike China, okay? And they're going to reverse their policy of isolationism. Now, China wanted to remain China, and they wanted to be isolated from the world, all right? They didn't want the rest of the world in there, and they also didn't want to become Western. They didn't want to become like European nations. They wanted to remain China. However, Japan is going to be different than China, and they're going to reverse their policy of isolationism. They're going to start trading with all of these different European nations, and they're also going to start to try to modernize by borrowing a lot of ideas from the West. This was actually called the Meiji Restoration, and it began in 1867. So what the goal was to make Japan strong enough to compete with the West. This is actually going to work out really well for the Japanese because they start building up their military. And by 1904-05, they actually defeat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War, which shocked the world because they could not believe that Japan, this little country which had been isolated for so long, was able to become extremely powerful. So one of the things when we talk about imperialism in Asia, while Japan was not controlled by any country, okay, the reason why this becomes something for us to talk about in terms of imperialism is because they were forced to open, okay, by the United States, who goes in there and says, you guys need to start trading with the rest of the world. But what this does is it sets Japan up to be extremely powerful. And by World War II, as you guys know, they're fighting against the United States in the war, okay? So then, furthermore, when we're talking about imperialism in Asia, we have to talk about the United States. So the United States is actually really late coming to this game, all right, coming to the imperialist game, because we had our Civil War, right, in the 1860s. So we're involved in Civil War. All we care about is what's going on in our country. When the war finally ends, this is when the United States is going to step in to the imperialism game, which shame on us, but who am I? All right, so we're actually going to fight Spain for control of the Philippines, and we're going to win that war, and we are actually going to take control of the Philippines and use it as a protectorate. It also is now used as a naval base for us, I believe, or some kind of military installation, and, it became a really good place for us to have because we needed somewhere that was in Asia where we could base our military out of. Another place that we're going to take over is that we actually annex, okay, meaning we just kind of take Hawaii in 1898, despite resistance from Queen Liliuokalani. I never can say it right. Liliuokalani. Okay, so we're not going to pay any attention to what she says and how she's like, hey, leave us alone. We're not going to do that. The United States is going to take them over. The United States is also going to take over Puerto Rico. Now, again, none of these places really are colonies for us. They're more protectorates. So, and they establish a sphere of influence for us as well. As you now know, though, Hawaii is a state, and it is considered part of the United States. But the Philippines and Puerto Rico are not. They are just considered to be a protectorate still, basically, of the United States. But this is just to let you know that the U.S. did get into the game. So now we have to talk about India a little bit. So India, as you guys can see here, and if you look here, right, you see another one of our political cartoons. This here is representing India. All right, so all of this here, this is India. That's actually what it looks like, all right, in Asia. And you see here, there is an old British guy, right? And you could tell he's British by his little curls there that he has on his head. And he looks like he's squeezing India, and he's squeezing gold into a bucket. Now, why would this be, and what would this be all about? Well, because the British East India Company. Now, you guys might say, wait a minute, there was a Dutch East India Company. And you are absolutely right. Okay, so there was a Dutch East India Company, and they in 1799 are actually going to be done. All right, so in 1799, Dutch East India Company, over with, it's done. And the British East India Company is going to become extremely powerful. So the British actually take control of India in 1763. Now, the reason that they were able to do this is because they defeated the French in the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War lasted from 1756 to 1763, and it was actually fought, you got it, in the colonies, okay, in the Americas. So it was fought in the United States, okay, but we weren't the United States yet. It was the colonies. So the British actually controlled India through the British East India Company. Okay, so they controlled it through them. So the British East India Company, they were basically the trading company, okay, for all of England, for all of Great Britain. And basically they ruled India with an iron fist. And what's going to happen is that the Indians are not happy. All right, because they don't want to be controlled. So they are going to use sepoys, or Indian soldiers, to lead a revolt called the Sepoy Mutiny. And they are going to try and overthrow the British East India Company and get them out of their country completely. However, they are not going to do well at this. Their little rebellion is suppressed, and the British government is officially going to make India part of their empire in 1858. So the British are going to do things like introduce social reforms. They advocate for education, they promote technology, but at the same time that they're doing this and trying to build infrastructure in India, not just for its peoples, but also for some of the colonists who come and live in India from Great Britain, they're going to also profit greatly from India. They actually called India the jewel in the crown because it brought so much wealth for the British and for any of the British citizens who lived there. Hence this picture over here, right? So we go back to this political cartoon. So when you're thinking about this political cartoon, now that you know, okay, that, you know, Great Britain got so much money out of India, you can understand why this British guy here is squeezing India and just getting a bunch of gold out. But what you guys should know is while the British became really rich off of India, the Indians, the native Indians who lived there, they actually lived very close to starvation, and the Brits had very little respect for the Indian culture. They didn't care anything for it. And so this later is going to become a huge issue in the 1900s when India is going to try and get Great Britain out of their country, which they will eventually do. But you should know that, you know, Great Britain held India for a long time, and it was the jewel in their crown. It was a huge moneymaker for them. So with all of this imperialism comes conflict. So there are a couple of different things, okay, conflicts that actually rise up in all of these different places as they are taken over by European powers. So one of them is the Crimean War, and this was Russia versus the Ottomans for control of the Red Sea. Now you guys might be thinking, who in the world were the Ottomans? The Ottomans no longer exist. Okay, the Ottomans were the Ottoman Empire, and at one time the Ottoman Empire was extremely powerful. They stretched across areas of the Middle East, through Turkey, Armenia, and they had a lot of power. And so Russia wants control of the Red Sea from the Ottomans, and they're going to end up fighting that battle with them. There's also conflict, like we just talked about a minute ago, the Sepoy Rebellion in India in 1857. And over their treatment, the Indians were very upset about how they were being treated by the British. And so this is going to lead to a rebellion, which is eventually put down. And it ends even worse for the Indians because the British are then going to completely take over their country and claim it as part of the British Empire. The Boxer Rebellion in China over foreign influence was fought in 1899, and you guys are going to take a closer look at that in just a little bit. So, what were then the results of imperialism? And you guys can see here, all right, this says the British Empire. So, I want you guys to look at this because this is not all these areas that are shaded anything other than yellow, okay, belonged to the British Empire. The only thing that the key is telling you down here is when they took those areas. So you can see that up here in Canada, all right, all Canada, totally taken pretty much by the British. Here it is again, these areas, British, okay, and it's telling you the years that they held them. The British eventually are going to lose these areas, but, you know, all of these areas in here for a very long time belonged to them. You guys can see over here, here's actually the British Isles. Down in here, look at how much land they held in Africa. They held land in South America. They held land in the Caribbean, if you guys look down here. Over here, they held all of India, okay? All of this area, India, all these areas. Down here in Australia, they also held New Zealand. So the British are going to come out of imperialism being the most powerful nation in the entire world because they held so much land. And the old saying goes, the sun never set on the British Empire. And they said that because if the sun was rising, you know, over here somewhere in Australia, you know, even though it had set over here in North America, but it was always rising somewhere else because the British Empire was so big and so expansive that it actually, you know, the sun never set on that British Empire. So what you should know too is that nationalism grew in the conquered areas. So what does nationalism mean? Well, nationalism means pride in your own nation. And typically nationalism, of course, it's pride in your own nation, but if you have other people in your nation colonizing your area or ruling your area, nationalism is going to become something that is going to make you want to get those people out. Okay, so that is a huge thing to remember because remember, there's 4 causes of World War I, which we're leading up to. There's militarism, there's alliances, there's imperialism, and there's nationalism. And nationalism is going to grow in these different areas, and they are going to try and force the different people out. Also from this, rivalries are going to develop that's going to create tension among Europeans. So all of these different Europeans, I want you to think back about how they carved up Africa. I want you to think about the Dutch East India Company. I want you to think about looking at the British Empire on this map and seeing all these different areas that they controlled. All of that is going to lead to a lot of hostility, right, between nations. Because remember, land equals power. The more land that you control, the more power that you can control, okay? The more power that you have, for your country. So this is going to lead us into conflicts, which are eventually going to turn into what comes to be known as World War I. So keep that in mind as we move towards there. Now for your exit ticket today, and I'm going to put this on something separate, but I want you to look at this picture, all right? So we have England here, right? Here's England. Then you see over here India, Egypt, okay? I can't see up there. I must be blind. Gibraltar, okay? Cyprus, Ireland, I can't see over here, but don't be mad at me. Canada, Jamaica, and look at it. So England is represented by this guy, and it kind of looks like an octopus. And he's got his hand here on all these different places. So, what your job is to explain the cartoonists or the person who drew this picture, their view of England as an imperialist power. What did they think about England? Remember, no answer is wrong as long as you justify it.